So, you never think that your relationship with one of your lifelong best friends could be destroyed in a matter of minutes. What I'm going to talk about is important because this very thing happened to me. And hopefully, with this speech, I can show just how easily a conflict like this can be avoided. My name is Zack Edwards, and I'm an Intro to Communication student at UALR. And today I'm going to tell you about the conflict that almost ruined my oldest friendship. First, I'll give the background of the conflict. Then I'll share a communication principle and two communication concepts connected to my story. And finally, I will provide recommendations for how I can improve my communication. So starting at the beginning, my case background is a story that happened between myself and my best friend, Danny, who was also my roommate at the time. And this is essentially a masterclass of what not to do if you would like to maintain your friendships. About 3 years ago, Danny and I were living in Bentonville, and we'd been living together for a few years at that point. But we'd been friends since about middle school. The problem was we weren't really doing a whole lot with our lives. So I decided that I wanted to change that. And I brought up that I wanted to go back to school and that I got accepted into UALR, and I thought it would be a cool idea if he came with me. And Danny was super supportive of the idea. So we began looking for apartments in Little Rock, and that took up the whole summer. And throughout that process, slowly he began dragging his feet a little more. The closer we got to actually moving, the harder it was to get him to do what I needed him to do. And finally, when I was trying to get him to give me the information we needed to sign a lease, he told me that he was no longer planning on moving, and he just didn't want to anymore. And so it rapidly turned into a heated argument. And basically Danny was accusing me of, trying to force him to alter his entire life to suit myself. And I was basically accusing him of setting me up to fail by waiting so long to say something in the first place. So we went back and forth like that for a while, but from there the argument was basically just us hurling insults at one another. And after that, we pretty much just stopped speaking. I managed to find a place in the nick of time, and I moved out. And it's really only been in the last year that we've been able to reconnect and start talking some things through. So moving on, there's a communication principle and two concepts connected to my story, and these are important to really understanding the complexity of my conflict. The relevant communication principle is that communication is complex. The definition, according to the Euler Survival Guide 2020, is that there is no easy or simple symbolic exchange between communicators. Even the most casual of interactions involves highly complex cognitive, psychological, and social processes. An example from my story that illustrates this principle is how neither of us knew how to bring up feelings or concerns to one another, even though we'd been close friends for years. My example illustrates this principle because it shows that due to the complexity of communication, there are ways that even the best of friends can fail miserably at it and then wind up at one another's throats. The first communication concept that I chose is avoidance. And the definition, according to University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing 2019, is a style of conflict management that often indicates a low concern for self and a low concern for others, and no direct conflict takes place. An example from my story that illustrates this concept is how we avoided all points of contention or concern in order to dodge any conflict. And my example illustrates this because by avoiding all conflict so much, we never actually took any consideration for how we were just allowing this thing to build up bigger and bigger until it could eventually hurt both of us. And the second communication concept is emotional intelligence. And the definition, according to University of Minnesota Library Publishing 2019, is the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's own thinking and action. An example from my story that illustrates this is how we both lashed out at one another. And my example illustrates this definition because neither of us had enough emotional intelligence at that time to actually articulate what we were feeling like adults, and instead we just resorted to hurling insults at each other like we were kids on a playground. So moving on, based on my experience, I can use communication concepts and ethical implications to improve my communications and help improve my interpersonal relationships. So this is how you come back from that. One communication concept I could use to improve my communication would be to engage in more active empathetic listening. The definition, according to University of Minnesota Libraries Publishing 2019, is the process in which a listener becomes actively and emotionally involved in an interaction in such a way that it is conscious on the part of the listener and perceived by the speaker. I chose this concept based on my experience because I believe that had either of us been active, empathetic listeners, we probably would have felt much more comfortable addressing uncomfortable issues with one another. I can use this concept to improve my communication by engaging in it more often in order to convey that I am, in fact, interested in what others have to share with me. And an ethical implication I can use to improve my interpersonal relationships is responsibility. The definition, according to the UALR Survival Guide 2019 or 2020, is holding ourselves accountable for our choices, actions, and communications with others. I chose this implication based on my story because it was the lack of taking responsibility for our communications with each other that led to this breakdown. I can use this implication to improve my interpersonal relationships by taking more responsibility for myself and my communications, whether that be speaking more articulately and clearly with others, or asking more questions to people so that I can fully understand them and they can fully understand me. So, in conclusion, today I told you about a fight that I had with my best friend and roommate, Danny. First, I gave you the case background of my conflict. Then I shared the communication principle and two concepts connected to my story. And finally, I provided recommendations for how I can improve my communication. So while it's true that you may never expect to be faced with a situation that pits you against your best friend, it's my belief that only with clear, concise, and respectful communication that you can guarantee that you never will.